Hello, everyone. Today's commentary is entitled Dangerous DEI, the Unconscionable Cost of Social Justice. We begin with a quotation from Dr. Thomas Sowell of the Hoover Institute, who wrote, "Envy was once considered to be one of the 7 deadly sins before it became one of the most admired virtues under its new name, social justice." End quote. In July of 2023, public school principal Richard Bilkstow killed himself. When announcing his death, his lawyer traced Bilkstow's deteriorating mental health and ultimate demise to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, workshops. His school had mandated his participation in them. Recordings show that he was harassed and humiliated by the DEI trainer for questioning one of her claims. A growing number of high-profile cases suggest that diversity workshops and their supporting materials regularly promote questionable claims, particularly about the overarching malicious character of the majority or white population. Similarly, hostility toward those who challenge DEI claims is part of the pattern. In Canada, students who challenge claims have been punished or expelled. Employees have been suspended. One whistleblower who leaked DEI training session material maligning the majority population lost his job. While the hostility to which Bilkstow was subjected during his DEI training is not unusual, his extreme response to it is extraordinary. But it also sounds an alarm. It draws our attention to the potentially negative nature of this instruction that is now universally conducted, usually as a compelled exercise, in most corporations, educational systems, government agencies, and even professional colleges, as we have seen with the case of Dr. Jordan Peterson. The DEI training that Bilkstow attended was focused heavily upon race, which is typical. While DEI instruction can be as varied as it is pervasive, so-called anti-racism education tends to get the most attention during workshops. While job candidates not categorized as a minority are increasingly prevented from applying for certain employment openings, the research shows that a reputation for promoting DEI can more generally affect job applications to an organization. Specifically, findings reveal that some Caucasian candidates perceive organizations that heavily promote messages of diversity and inclusion as potentially discriminatory work environments. DEI's negative perception extends beyond potential job candidates. 2/3 of human resource specialists, those in charge of overseeing DEI initiatives, report that diversity training does not have positive effects. Interestingly, both the research into DEI and the majority of those involved in such training have arrived at the same conclusion. When it comes to harmony and tolerance, DEI does not make things better, but it can make things much worse. While the good of DEI training remains elusive, the harms associated with it are less equivocal. DEI instruction has been shown to increase prejudice and activate bigotry among participants by making stereotypes top of mind or by implanting new biases not previously held. For example, in a laboratory setting, a University of Toronto research team determined that race-focused DEI campaigns exerting strong pressure on people to check their prejudices at the door backfired, yielding heightened levels of bigotry. Simply put, such studies show that when DEI-type workshop leaders instruct participants to suppress their biases, be they existing or newly implanted, many will cling to them more tightly and generate new justifications for them. While the Caucasian majority is typically the focus of contempt in DEI instruction, leaving them feeling isolated and demoralized, increasingly, participants of Asian ethnicity are also being targeted. In achieving on average greater salary and educational outcomes than the majority population, this community presents a problem to the major claim of DEI instruction that skin color or ethnicity matters most to success. Take billionaire presidential candidate, author, podcaster, and serial entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, for example. The solution that some DEI advocates have adopted is to deny that Asians qualify as a visible minority. They claim that having outcomes similar to the majority population excludes one from being a person of color. It is instead all about where one fits on the hierarchy of woke victimhood. Borrowing ideas from academic race studies, some DEI proponents have thus begun to refer to Asians as white adjacent or near white and accuse them of perpetuating white supremacy. On the extreme end, certain school boards in the United States have gone so far as to remove the category Asian from student profiles, lumping anyone of Asian ancestry into the white category. Beyond denying minority status to those of Asian ancestry, the current trend among DEI consultants and departments is to weight the scales against them, a move reminiscent of the institutional racism they faced in some Western nations during the 19th and 20th centuries. Nowhere has this been more obvious than in college admissions in the U.S. Striking evidence reveals that, for the benefit of diversity and inclusion, Asian students are being denied admission to some of America's most elite universities. Affirmative action discrimination and other forms of racial preference are also ubiquitous in Canada's public institutions. For example, Toronto Metropolitan University, or TMU, has a new medical school admissions policy reserving 75% of its seats for Indigenous, Black, and other equity-deserving groups who may still be considered for admission if their GPA is below 3.3, an already low standard for admission. Now, there is ample evidence that race-based admissions policy is unwise. The negative impacts of affirmative action in university admissions over the decades in the U.S. and elsewhere are well documented. Besides the evidence of general harms of affirmative action, new reports provide yet more reasons to think that TMU's medical admissions policy will backfire. The most obvious drawback? The quality of medical practice could be reduced as academic standards for admissions are lowered and as race and other irrelevant factors are considered instead of ability. A recent U.S. study on affirmative action in another industry, intelligence, validates this concern. In an article in Econ Journal Watch, John A. Gentry of Missouri State University's School of Defense and Strategic Studies outlines the effects of affirmative action and DEI policies on the operational performance of 18 U.S. intelligence agencies, including the CIA, the NSA, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. Like other federal agencies, Gentry writes, the intelligence agencies have, quote, been a setting of burgeoning DEI policies and programs, especially since 2011, designed to favor privileged demographic groups in hiring, promotions, awards, and assignments, end quote. The results? Well, first, while the intelligence community has historically emphasized apolitical public service, the introduction of DEI injected political motivation into its procedures and activities. Second, teamwork was impaired because the heavy-handed orthodoxy of DEI causes self-censorship by government personnel who do not support this agenda. Third, many intelligence officers say that DEI resulted in more tolerance of bad judgment and poor operational performance in the name of diversity. This has harmed human intelligence collection. Intelligence analysis was similarly impacted. Finally, DEI-spawned activism has reduced public confidence in intelligence agencies. Gentry therefore concludes that, quote, politically driven advocates of DEI not only fail to understand that domestically driven demographic diversity does not improve the performance of foreign-focused intelligence services, they have significantly damaged the operation performance of the agencies, end quote. While Gentry's piece was on the American intelligence sector, it is not difficult to see how many of the same negative consequences, like politicization of the profession, self-censorship, and reduced public confidence, could arise from insertion of racial quotas in Canadian medical school admissions and promotion of social justice over medical expertise within the profession. Yet more evidence that TMU's affirmative action policies will backfire comes from a recent New York Times review of the University of Michigan's expanding DEI initiatives. It concluded that, quote, instead of improving students' ability to engage with one another across their differences, Michigan's DEI expansion has coincided with an explosion in campus conflict over race and gender, end quote. Students and faculty members at the school reported a less positive climate on campus and were less likely to interact with people of a different race after the introduction of DEI programs. This report is devastating because of how widespread these initiatives are at the University of Michigan. It has invested nearly $250 million since 2016 on DEI staff and programming. Each and every university department, unit, and office must have a DEI action plan, and some 240 employees there work in DEI offices or have one of those keywords, diversity, equity, or inclusion, in their job titles. When this latest piece on the University of Michigan is added to the volumes of evidence showing negative impacts of affirmative action at universities, the TMU Medical School's admissions policies cannot prove beneficial. Nor should this inspire confidence that other illiberal policies, such as race-based anti-poverty programs, race-based federal procurement, or race-based justice system, would deliver good things to Canadians. Treating people disparately based upon race does not enhance social harmony or any other desirable outcomes. In his most recent book entitled Social Justice Fallacies, Dr. Thomas Sowell of the Hoover Institute explains how the quest for social justice is a powerful crusade of our time, with an appeal to many different people for various reasons. But those who use the same words do not always present the same meanings. Clarifying those meanings is the first step toward finding out what we agree upon. From there, it is largely a question of what the facts are. Sowell reveals how many things thought to be true simply cannot stand up to documented facts, which are often the opposite of what is widely believed. However attractive the social justice vision, the crucial question is whether the social justice agenda will get us to the fulfillment of that vision. History shows that the social justice agenda has often led to the opposite direction, sometimes with catastrophic consequences. More things are involved besides mere mistakes. All human beings are fallible, and social justice warriors may not necessarily make any more mistakes than the rest of us. But crusaders, with an utter certainty about their mission, are often undeterred by obstacles, evidence, or even fatal dangers. That is where much of the Western world is today. The question is whether we will continue on heedlessly past the point of no return. American author Heather McDonald has also written extensively on this topic. According to McDonald, we are in crisis from the university to the workplace. Toxic ideas first spread by higher education have undermined humanistic values, fueled intolerance, and widened divisions in our greater culture. Chaucer, Shakespeare, and Milton, oppressive. Western history, tyranny. Professors correcting grammar and spelling, or employers hiring by merit, racist and sexist. Students emerge into the working world believing that we are defined by our skin color, gender, and sexual preference, and that oppression based upon these traits is endemic within Western culture. Speech that challenges these campus orthodoxies is silenced by brute force. In The Diversity Delusion, McDonald argues that the root of this problem is belief in the West's endemic racism and sexism, a belief that has engendered a metastasizing diversity bureaucracy in society and academia. Diversity commissars denounce meritocratic standards as discriminatory, enforce hiring quotas, and teach students and adults alike to think of ourselves as perpetual victims. From Me Too mania that blurs flirtations with criminal acts, to implicit bias and diversity compliance training that sees racism in every interaction, McDonald argues that we are creating a society of narrowed minds, primed for grievance, and jeopardizing the very concept of having a competitive edge. There is, however, hope in the works of authors, composers, and artists who have long inspired the best in us. Compiling her decades of research and writing on the subject, the Diversity Delusion calls for a return to the classical liberal pursuits of open-minded inquiry and expression by which everyone can discover a common humanity. In her follow-up book entitled When Race Trumps Merit, MacDonald poses some troubling questions. Does your workplace have too few black people in top jobs? Then it must be racist. Does the advanced math and science high school in your city have too many Asians? Then it is racist. Does your local museum employ too many white women? Then it too is racist. After the BLM protests of 2020, prestigious institutions from the medical profession to the fine arts pleaded guilty to systemic racism. How else to explain that blacks are overrepresented in prisons and underrepresented in corporate suites and faculty lounges, their leaders asked. The official answer for such disparities is disparate impact, a once obscure legal theory that is now transforming our world. Any traditional standard of behavior or achievement that impedes exact racial proportionality in any enterprise is now presumed racist. Medical school admission tests, expectation of scientific accomplishment in awarding research grants, the enforcement of criminal law, all are under assault because they have a disparate impact upon underrepresented minorities. MacDonald provides an alternative explanation for such racial disparities. It is wide academic skill gaps that cause the lack of proportional representation in our most meritocratic organizations, and vast differences in criminal offending actually account for the racially disproportionate prison populations. The need for such a corrective argument could not be more urgent. Federal science agencies now treat researchers' skin color as a core qualification. Museums and orchestras choose which art and music to promote based upon race. As witnessed recently in Brampton, Ontario, police officers avoid making arrests, and prosecutors decline to bring charges to avoid disparate impact on minority criminals, especially recent immigrants to the West. MacDonald's commentary breaks powerful taboos, but is driven by a sense of alarm. It is also supported by detailed case studies of how disparate impact thinking jeopardizes scientific progress, destroys public order, and poisons appreciation of art and culture. As long as alleged racism remains the only permissible explanation for racial difference, then we will continue tearing down excellence and putting lives, as well as civilizational achievement, at risk. The equity battle goes beyond decriminalization. Many schools today no longer disproportionately punish blacks for misbehaving, regardless of their bad behavior, while also adjusting test standards to eliminate gaps in academic performance. If minorities cannot pass the test to enter academically elite high schools, alter admission standards to increase diversity, even if overall school quality suffers. Higher education has become equity obsessed, so schools ignore test scores to curate a more racially diverse student body. That a black admitted to Harvard struggles scholastically and would thrive at the less elite Boston University is irrelevant to equity champions. The primary goal is outward appearances, not what is academically best for the overwhelmed black student. The damage caused by pursuing equity now even applies in how doctors treat injured children. A recent essay by Naomi Schaefer-Riley recounts 2 urgent medical journal articles advising doctors not to report injuries to children. A legally mandated policy to protect kids, since reporting child abuse would disparately harm certain minorities. Why? Well, because black children suffer physical abuse and neglect at triple the rate of white ones, so that reporting these injuries exposes black parents to punishment. For social justice doctors produced by equity-driven medical schools like TMU, reporting abuse constitutes medical malpractice. One equity advocate even proposed eliminating the entire child welfare system since it harms minorities by detracting from what is sorely needed: more and better food, shelter, healthcare, education, and art. Capitalism, not abusive parents, is the real problem. Anti-poverty programs are the solution to child abuse. The shift from ending inequality to eliminating the appearances of it is predictable. Trillions have been spent and countless anti-discrimination laws passed to achieve racial equality with pitiful results. Significant racial divides remain for illegitimacy, poverty, educational attainment, accumulating financial assets, crime, and multiple medical conditions, as the menu of reasonable cures only shrinks. Even relatively draconian solutions such as mandatory racial quotas do not move the equity needle. These failures are too large to ignore, but openly acknowledging them is still heresy. So, rather than confess failure, just conjure the illusion of success by virtue signaling equity. This policy is reminiscent of the Potemkin villages created by Field Marshal Grigory Potemkin to deceive Russian Empress Catherine II into believing that rural Russia was a paradise. But now, rather than picturesque houses and well-fed, happy peasants, we have elite schools that reflect society and cities where crime is supposedly in decline. Can this false reality endure? Will we believe the new and improved crime statistics that merely reflect decriminalization and minimal enforcement? Will we believe the equity-driven upbeat statistics about soaring graduation rates and declining school violence in inner-city schools? In other words, will the social justice campaign really work? Well, probably not. In today's world, it is difficult to hide unpleasant reality, given the multiplicity of information sources. Sooner or later, harsh reality seeps out, and the manipulations necessary to sustain the fake utopian vision collapses. Even in the old Soviet dictatorship, where truth-telling begged a trip to the Gulag, the regime failed to fool the people. In today's West, most of us know that calling the 2020 George Floyd riots a mainly peaceful summer of love is a lie. Nor will we tolerate endless government intervention to level all outcomes. After all, the list of inequalities is infinite, so achieving equity requires relentless intervention. There will be programs to close the home ownership gap, close gaps in obesity, gaps in longevity, gaps in personal happiness, and myriad others necessary to achieve social justice. Eventually, with so many gaps to close, government will increasingly grow all-powerful, hardly what any of us should want from government. The pursuit of equity also assumes that all people are so alike that the government possesses the power to level differences. Can government ensure that there are just as many female engineers or zero racial differences in athletic performance? The underlying principle of equity, all outcomes can be made equal, is simply not credible. Finally, are these equity-driven subterfuges sustainable? Likely not. What happens in New York if hundreds of black pedestrians are now killed while jaywalking? Recall how elite schools quickly dropped standardized tests and admissions to obscure the low test scores of certain minorities. This equity measure failed, and schools restored racist metrics like the SAT. Yes, officials can decriminalize shoplifting, but they cannot prevent ransacked businesses from fleeing the city. The vacant stores tell the truth. You can fake graduation rates, but employers will still refuse to hire illiterates. Justin Trudeau, Kamala Harris, and the like-minded champions of equity will fail. No government can close every gap, regardless of the fakery or coercion. Reality is irrepressible, and we cannot substitute fantasy for truth, no matter how much power we grant to the state to fix all of our problems. There is one overriding truism. We never use race, except as a means to power. Race is never an end, it is always a means. It has no role in human affairs except as corruption. Since racism is in our DNA and critical race theory is the DNA of DEI, focusing on race to eliminate all disparate outcomes has exploded into every vestige of our culture. It has literally taken over every branch of government in the US and Canada, including the military, and is fully staffed in most every university and corporation. Like nearly all leftist policies claiming to solve problems created by leftists, DEI is nothing but another corruption that is the very antithesis of what it purports to be. DEI practitioners would have us believe that it is a mere reflection of a changing society and the desire to make sure everyone is represented fairly. They sell it with soft-sounding words to make us feel all warm and fuzzy. It is all teddy bears and safe spaces, love and kindness. Or is it? Dr. Soul asks a poignant question here. Quote, since this is an era when many people are concerned about fairness and social justice, what is your fair share of what someone else has worked for? End quote. Race is not the only corruption of DEI. While many school boards sold it to taxpayers as a way to close the decades-old and entrenched achievement gap between blacks and whites in the U.S., it is really just a Trojan horse for every leftist ideological agenda. Gender dysphoria is a real mental disorder that, according to author Abigail Schreier, historically affects less than 0.01%, mostly boys ages 2 to 4. Supported by their parents in their anatomies, over 85% simply outgrew it. In layman's terms, a phase for the vast majority. Yet DEI advocates have also embraced this corruption of science and biology that took a rare mental disorder and turned it into a political movement designed to destroy the heteronormative, white, male, heterosexual power structure. And if men can become women and women men, the natural structure of creation could be toppled. Just like CRT, the goal is to destroy Western civilization. DEI has no role in human affairs beyond corruption. It has no place in the West. It is the complete opposite of what all coaches of sports, business, and life have taught us for centuries: to overcome adversity and persevere against the odds, to fight through pain, to come back stronger after disappointment and loss, to rise up after rejection, objection, failure, job loss, bankruptcy, divorce, and death of loved ones. To quote Friedrich Nietzsche, what does not destroy me makes me stronger. DEI teaches us to curl up in a ball like a victim, wallowing in a sea of microaggressions. Weak. It is a Trojan horse of destructive lies, devoid of objective and biblical truth, robbing parents of their agency over their own children. DEI, dividing and destroying Western civilization, an environment of exclusion, eliminator of excellence, ideology of ignorance and idiotic insanity. Only crazy people would want to burn down all hope for humanity over a leftist theory, a really bad, evil theory that must be rejected everywhere by everyone. Hey ho, DEI has got to go. We close with a quotation from the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character."